then I have the quizzes. Oops, I don't think. I have the quizzes to return, and they might be of help to study, of course. I have your corrections, and I have not okay. Before you leave for this class, if you gave me test questions, get them from me before you leave, but I'm going to use them kind of during this class to help with the review. But here goes the rest of it. Can I have about 4 volunteers to start yelling out names? Come on up and grab a pile. Hopefully the name's on the back and you don't have to turn it over to look at the grade.
Joshua.
And I have a feeling we've got quite a few passes.
Joshua Phelps. Read in here.
Angela Carter.
My new
Davis
today.
Smith.
Miranda's
Abigail.
Is this John?
Yes.
Okay.
He's not
Madison Burton.
Here. There's Maria. Bryce. Randy Turner.
Brooke Ashcroft.
Nick Clark.
Olivia.
Annie.
Mickey Hunley.
Brooklyn Bauer.
Kaylee. Is she here?
Joshua Phelps.
I don't think so, because I just.
Ben Cressy. Ben.
Joshua Phelps.
Olivia
Kyra Davison.
Ball.
Jade.
Maddie Baston.
Olivia Martin.
Stacy Flesh.
Madison Burton. Josh Phelps.
Thank you.
Abigail Graham.
Jimmy
Aaron.
Raymond.
Aaron Ellis.
Lauren.
Angela Carter. Angela Carter. Cheyenne Cliff.
Madison Brown.
Madison Brown. I'm Madison Brown.
Grace Truly.
Looks like we got the same.
Ava Smith.
Yep.
Hopefully next time.
Jade Van Pelt.
Anybody else get one that's not yours? I thought I copied it off. Let me check to see if I have a grade for it. Yeah,
Because I know what I wrote on it.
all right. You're right, I bet I didn't. Let me go back and look, or if you want to resend them to me again, can you do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
And then I can give you. Did you email them to me or did you hand them to me? Would you mind resending them? They may have gotten buried. You wouldn't believe how many emails I get a day, and I apologize if I missed them. We'll still get to your points.
I have a copy of mine if you need a copy of mine, but I emailed it to you.
Did I get yours though?
Number 9.
Which one?
9.
Number 9. General type of organisms are found in the kingdom Protista. They include algae, slime molds, and which other group by common name? They include algae, slime molds, which other group? Protozoa. Protozoa, not Protista, it's a big grouping name. Protozoans are like little animals. So ones that actually move like the paramecium and the amoebas kind of move like animals. Those are in the combinate protozoans, like it's before you actually get the true animals, protozoa, zoo. Okay. Any others?
What was 10?
Which one?
10.
10. It would be heterotrophic. Mixotrophs combine photosynthesis and heterotrophic nutrition. In other words, they can eat other things as well as having chloroplasts that they can photosynthesize. And that would be like the euglena does that. Anything else? 14. The claim to fame statement about charophytes, a type of green algae, what they're most famous for in the evolutionary sense. They're the ancestors of plants, the terrestrial plants. The charophytes are. And I do believe that everything that you've just asked me in some form is on the test on Monday. Yes. I'm sorry, which one? 7 and 12. With respect to unique structures of some bacteria, what is the most resistant structural form of life known of some bacteria requiring autoclaving and other extreme techniques of sterilization? Endospores, the most resistant form of life would be ENDOSPORES, endospores. They're particularly those in the genus Clostridium, some others too, but primarily Clostridium tetani, Clostridium botulinum. They tend to grow in anaerobic conditions really well. That's why canning is such a big deal. If you don't can it right, you don't have it raised to 121 degrees Celsius. Boiling water is always going to stay around 100, no matter how long you do it, but you have to add pressure to it in order, and that's what an autoclave does. It's like a glorified pressure cooker. And that's sterilization, as opposed to disinfection. So if you spray 70% alcohol on the lab benches, what are you doing? What process is that? Disinfection, which reduces the number of microorganisms and hopefully kills most pathogens. But there's a hopeful there, whereas a true sterilization kills everything, including endospores. Okay, and that's also on the exam itself form too. So you some good questions to ask about in terms of the bacteria grouping. Any others? Yes. Number 12, diatoms have pillbox-like shapes whose skeletons are made of this type of chemical. What is it?
Silica.
What is it?
Silica.
Silica, which is a component of glass. Okay, so silica, and that's also on the test. Yes? 11. Certain dinoflagellates at certain times of the year can cause unfavorable conditions for swimming and other things in the water due to this bloom. Another important question.
Red tide.
What is it?
Red tide.
Red tide, yes. And it's dinoflagellates. Some of them can cause red tide, yes. Yes. Archaea are bacteria-like and often live in extremophile environments. Halophiles live in extreme salt. Anything to do with halo is salt conditions. Get that, archaea are bacteria-like, but they're still prokaryotic. But in some ways, they are more like eukaryotes. What do they not have that bacteria have? Or what do they not do that bacteria have? Some of the main, there was a chart with a comparison. Yes.
Some archaea have histones, whereas no bacteria have like histones.
I'm sorry, just as I walked in the room, my batteries went dead and my hearing devices. I'm sorry, what?
Some archaea have histones, but no bacteria have like the histones for their DNA.
Right, and that was one of your exam questions that you wrote,
Yeah.
and it's also on the test.
Oh.
Okay. And that was one of the things, and then what else?
I just have another question.
Oh, okay, another question.
Was 13 Pseudopodia?
Do amoebas move with cilia, flagella, or pseudopodia? Amoebas are the ones that move by those false feet, and that's called pseudopodia. And they then phagocytize their food. Their cytoplasm goes around and it brings it in, puts a food vacuole around it, lysosome comes up, squirts enzymes into it, digests it, and then absorbs it. Okay, so that's pretty exciting. Pseudopodia. So I would know, what do Euglena move with? Flagella. What do Paramecia move with?
They move with like the little cilia.
Cilia. They're like little oars all around it.
I
The
got to
cilia.
see those in action yesterday.
You did?
It's
Yes.
really cool.
On a video?
No, under a microscope.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah.
I would know those too. Hey, you're hitting. This must be a pretty good quiz here. Okay, Euglena move with flagella, which are the long quips. And they're also mixotrophs. They can do either photosynthesis or nutritionally they can be heterotrophs. Okay, Paramecia move with little short oars called cilia, and they do have exciting movements. And then the pseudopodia just move their cytoplasm very slowly, and they surround, like if it's another protozoan or something they want to eat, and it surrounds it, pulls it in. And that's pseudopodia, false feet. Those are protozoans, and so are Paramecia, protozoans. Whereas Euglenas, even though they have, Euglenas are weird, I mean, protists are the weird group. They've got a little bit of everything in them. If you don't know what to do with something and it's pretty much microscopic, you throw it in the protist group. So I look in the future for the protist group to really be fanned out a little more because you've got the protozoan animal likes, you've got the plant likes, which are like the Euglena with the chloroplast, but they move. So that's kind of an animal characteristic, but they photosynthesize, which is very much a plant characteristic. I would also, I think there's one question on the protists concerning the clades. And you will have 10 minutes, so it's not that I want you to spend time memorizing that whole clade situation, but you should know where it is in your notes for that time. Hello. Guess whose test got rated?
Oh, dude.
We really did. Sorry you had to wait so long. Yeah, and I did some so there's all my maths to figure it out, right? That's a test I added 18 points to everybody's score. Yes?
Is that the eukaryotic, like, supergroup? Is that
Yeah, the super groups, I think it's in the protist chapter. Oh, let me look. Yeah, let's see. Yes, it is. It looks like this. Everybody, looks like this. It is. And we probably have more for you, Terrence. Let's see. Well, maybe not. This is this. Okay, we good with that quiz? That is a pretty good quiz to hang on to. Okay, this is, it is made up. I did make it up last night, and I went through the exam questions I had in front of me. And I can guarantee you I took at least one question, sometimes two, sometimes three, off of everybody's that I had. You had good questions? Did you find it really helps you to study, to try to make out questions? I mean, it really is a good study technique for anybody, even if you can't turn them in to get credit for them for other teachers and other subjects. It's really can be very helpful to do that. Okay, this is how it turned out. You want the stats for the exam. There are 60 questions. I have more true and false than normal, and many of them came from you all. 13 of them are true and false, and they're all mixed up. And it's not in order. I think there might be a plant question first off. Don't hold me to that, but it's not, I don't think it's a bacteria question right away. So they're all mixed up. So those are your categories. Domains, there are 3 domains, right? And then I would say those are more with C27. So bacteria is a domain and archaea is a domain, and they both have what kind of cell type? Prokaryotic. They have no nucleus. They have no membrane-bound organelles. And then what's the third domain that includes everything else, including the animals? What is it? Eukarya. And they have eukaryotes cells, which have your typical cell we studied with the nucleus and all the organelles, the mitochondria and Golgi apparatus and all of those things. So, protists, plants, fungi, they're all in the eukarya domain. But we previously just mentioned that archaea is probably even more closely related somewhat to the eukaryotes, although they don't have a nucleus. They are technically still prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus, right? Okay. Which organisms, out of all of these up here, which were probably the first forms of life known on Earth? Bacteria, I would probably say. So what kind of cell type do they have? Prokaryotes. Okay, so prokaryotes. Yeah, if you want to take notes on this, because there may be reasons why I'm asking these questions. All right. This is what I have for bacteria, archaea, and taxonomy. These are approximate numbers. And in fact, they may not add up to exactly 60, because some of them may actually cross over too. I have approximately 19 questions on bacteria, taxonomy, that type of thing. So 19 questions is a good chunk out of 60. That's almost a third, isn't it? Protists, I have about 13 questions. The actual plant diversity, the first plant diversity chapter, although it's kind of hard between, there really were 2 chapters there, weren't there? I forgot to say that. Was there also a chapter 30? There was, wasn't it? Okay, so 29 and 30 I'm kind of putting together. I would say there were approximately 7 questions from those. But then some of that also runs into 35, which is plant anatomy as well. But anyway, fungi I only have, I guess they got left out a little bit more. I only asked about 6 questions on fungi. And I would say plant anatomy and terms, there were about 17 questions. So, not necessarily by design, it just kind of ended up that way, although I okay that way, truthfully. Okay, what do you think? True or false? A dicot has 2 cotyledons. True. Eukaryotes were the first organisms to inhabit the earth. Prokaryotes were. And in fact, 2 of you said that right away. Bryophytes are vascular. Ah. Okay, so the grouping of the plants, remember that we had right there on the board. Bryophytes and mosses. Are they vascular? No, and they stay real small. In other words, they don't have xylem and phloem and tubes, so they stay small. But the vascular plants start with the ferns and the other groupings of lower plants. But do the ferns have seeds?
No, I think it's spores.
Spores, right. And the seed plants start with the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. And of course, they're still vascular. So kind of have that hierarchy of plants in your mind when you go to answer this question. So bryophytes are vascular. False. They're not vascular. Okay. Color is gram-positive.
Violet.
Blue, purple, somewhere in that bluish category, because of the crystal violet.
The gram-negative one that can be toxic.
Gram-negatives are what?
The one that can be toxic.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Which one's usually the most difficult to keep? Now, there are exceptions. Negative, because it is a much more complex cell wall, and it has smaller amounts of peptidoglycan, but it has like 2 cell membranes, and then it's got a little layer of peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan is a component of the cell walls. Usually you say, if somebody asks you a general question, and what is the main cell wall component of bacteria? You would say peptidoglycan. Okay, but there's less peptidoglycan in gram-negatives, but there's a lot more thickness to it that helps protect it. So the gram-negatives tend to be often harder to kill in terms of antibiotics and things, although some gram-positives can be pretty harsh. A characteristic of a eukaryotic cell is having no nucleus. False. They do have a nucleus. Okay. Another true or false. The phloem of a tree, P-H-L-O-E-M, vascular tissue. Okay, the phloem of a tree moves water and minerals up from the roots.
True.
False.
It's false. Make it true.
That's the xylem.
Xylem. Okay, xylem is water. Think of it, this is one way I used when I had problems remembering, when I was a student and problems remembering which was which. The W for water is at the end of the alphabet next to X. And food flows through the phloem. A play on words. Food flows through the phloem. I don't know, if it works for you, use it. If it doesn't, to remember which is
Say
which.
5 times rapidly.
Yeah. Okay, if a flower of an angiosperm has 12 stamens, oh, wait a minute. It is a monocot or a dicot? Well, that is a tough one there. 4 would be 8, 5 would be 10. Most likely it is a multiples of more likely it's a monocot because it's multiples of 3s. So it'd be 4 times 3. And remember, dicots are in multiples of 4s and 5s. So it could be 4, it could be 8, or it could be 5, it could be 10. So those are your rules. Monocots are 3s. I know it's tempting to say there's not enough information to tell, but more likely it's a monocot. What are the closest relatives of land plants? The charophytes for sure, and also, the charophytes, which are a type of protist. multicellular or unicellular? Unicellular, and they are a type of fungus. Fungus, not a protist. Is it bacteria or archaea that live in extreme environments? How many of you say bacteria? Facultative means they can do either. You know what, I also think I forgot to tell you the rest of the stats for the exam. About 13 true and false, which there are about 11 short answers without a section, but there are more short answers than that. But a lot of my short answers actually did, is it this or this? However, there are about 11 of them that don't give you a choice that you need to know. Like charophytes might be one of them. That's a possibility. The ancestors to land plants. The rest of them are multiple choice. So, what is the name for in bacteria, the extrachromal piece of DNA that DNA technologists or genetic engineers use to insert genes into it? What are those called? Plasmids. Thank you. Plasmids. What is probably the most famous gram-negative coliform bacteria that's used? E. coli, right, for Escherichia genus coli, C-O-L-I for colon, is probably the most famous. If I ask you to, if I give you a shape and an arrangement of a bacteria, can you draw it for me? If it's Diplo, it would be 2. If it's Strep, it would be in a chain. If it's Staph, it would be clustered like grapes. And then you have to look and see whether it says Coccus for round, or whether it's Rod for Bacillus, or it's probably not going to be Spirilla. It's probably going to be either Coccus or Bacillus. Who has naked seeds? I'm sorry, what? Gymnosperms. Gymnosperms. What are some examples of gymnosperms? Pine tree. Ginkgo. A lot of the evergreen type trees would be in there, but pine trees probably, and they actually are on the ends of what is the actual fruiting body? Cones. Okay, they're in cones. Yes. The ologies. What's the study of tissues called? Histology. What's the study of fungus called? Mycology. What's the study of bacteria called?
Microbiology.
Okay. It can be microbiology, but specifically it's bacteriology. But microbiology is the whole general overview of anything that's microscopic, that's an organism. So it could also include protists as well as bacteria.
There's like overlap between microbiology and mycology, like microscopic and whatnot.
You're right. There's that too. Yes. Yes. What is the shape of the chromosome of a bacteria? Circular, okay. So it's not rod-shaped like ours. We have many rod-shaped chromosomes. It's a circular also, just like it is. And it is true, we mentioned it before, that histone in the chromatin wrapping, it's histone proteins is sort of like a spool with DNA wrapped around this protein called histone, Histone, and that's present in eukaryotes and also present in archaea. What is the term given when microorganisms, which again, that could be bacteria, it could be even some fungi, it could be protists, are used to remove pollutants from the environment?
Bioremediation.
Very good, bioremediation. Bio, which means living things, remediating the environment. It's like oil spills, for one thing. This is one example. Oil spills, they can try to get some microscopic. Okay, if you have, in fact, at the top of your test, there's actually, it's really there for decoration purposes. There's a flower. And it does eventually ask you later on in the test, it says, go back to the front of the test. Is this flower an example of a monocot or a dicot? So how would you answer that?
Roots. It's just a flower, right? Like,
It's
no,
just,
like,
it's just the flower, yes.
You have to count the like stamens and like.
Count
Petals.
the petals. Yes, count the petals. And if you have petals in multiples of 3s, like if you had 3, or you had 6, or you had 9, it would be a monocot. If you had 5, if you had 4, 8, or multiples of 4s or 5s would be a dicot.
Flower for each test.
A random flower of, I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Each person would have a different answer. You mean?
No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, it's gonna be the same thing all. for the
Right.
flower, Okay.
Right. You just don't know whether I'm gonna give you a monocot or I'm gonna give you a
Yeah.
dicot. What's a common name for the ripened mature ovary of an angiosperm that's commonly eaten by humans? It's a fruit. Okay. A ripened mature ovary usually contains seeds, is called a fruit. Now, if on the test we give you examples of different things, we might ask you which of these is or is not a fruit. So, what are some examples of true biological fruits? Go ahead, Aaron.
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes,
Cucumbers.
cucumbers. Okay. What?
Peas in a pod.
Peas in a pod? Oh. Aren't those vegetables?
Also.
I'm just playing with you. Peas are actually seeds. And the pea pod is an ovary. So there's one that we differ with the produce department, that thinks they're vegetables. But remember, this would be a good, I'm gonna even let you do 3 statements of information. I am not adding any points to this test because there should not be any necessary. You should do fine without it, because there are 3 statements of information I'm asking you to give me, which is 8 points right there added, if you get those 3. Don't forget to do those. Okay, so, what is the definition of a vegetable?
vegetative stem or leaf part of a plant?
Yes! Vegetative means non-reproductive. Okay, so the vegetative parts of a plant, if you eat either a root or you eat a stem, or a leaf even, those are vegetables. But if you're eating a ripe and mature ovary with probably seeds in it, unless it's been artificially selected to be seedless, okay, that you have a ripe and mature ovary, it's a fruit. So a pea pod is really a fruit. Don't we look at life differently than we did before we came into this class? No. Okay, that brought me to think of, I thought of something weird. Oh, and some obvious things in the plant anatomy section. If you do a cross-section of a stem, the vascular bundles, which contain the xylem and phloem, are arranged how? In a dicot, in a ring. Monocots are arranged, vascular bundles are arranged, scattered. Now the root is almost kind of the opposite, kind of. In the cross-section of the root of a monocot, what am I trying to say? It's almost the same, but the dicot vascular bundles are actually like in a star formation in a dicot in the middle. Venation pattern, veins and leaves. What is the venation pattern of monocots? Parallel. And I have a leaf at the very end of the test for you. And I'm going to ask you, is this a monocot or dicot? And there are two main types of venation for dicots. Feather-like, which is called pinnate, where you have a central vein and then you have like feathers. That's called pinnate. And then palmate is more like the palm, where you have the stem comes out here and then it, like fingers on a palm, you know.
What do you spell
Pinnate, pinnate, and palmate is Palmate. And those are examples of venation in dicots. Obvious ones here too. There might be one or two questions on this. How do you, okay, the dominant generations in plants. You know you have an alternation of generations where there's a haploid gametophyte and there's a diploid 2N sporophyte. And just think that if we were in the alternation, of generations, we would be a sporophyte. Okay, so mosses, which are the lowest group of plants, mosses and bryophytes, they have their dominant generation being gametophyte, right? And the gametophyte is the haploid. When we say dominant generation, it means the generation in which you recognize the plant as being that plant. Oh, here's a moss. Well, that's the dominant generation. But it's a haploid, and it's that little stalk that comes up at certain times of the year that is the sporophyte with a capsule at the top. But how about ferns up through all the plants in the gymnosperms and the angiosperms and the sporophyte, dominant sporophyte? Yes, that is true. What questions do you have for me? Do you have any? Yes.
Can you just repeat like the vascular bundles? So rings are in.
You actually have the vascular bundles scattered, well, not scattered, but in ring formation around the center in the dicot stem cross section. In terms of the lower plants, if you have megaspores and microspores, which one's female, which one's male? Mega is what? Female. It's actually larger. That's why it's called mega. And the sperm are smaller, and that's called a microspore. Okay, in flowers, in flowering plants, which are the angiosperms, what comes first, pollination or fertilization? Pollination, yeah. The pollen from the anther of the part of the flower has to get onto the stigma of the pistil or carpel of the flower, which is female. It then drills down the pollen tube into the bottom of where the ovary is. And there are ovules, which are sort of like eggs, which have the potential to turn into. Okay, is there a single or a double fertilization in angiosperms? Double. The first one is to make the diploid 2N embryo, which is normal. Okay, we understand, even in humans. But the second fertilization is to form the food source that's in the seed that will support the developing embryo until it germinates. And what is that stuff called? Endosperm. Endosperm. Endosperm, yes. Yes, endospores and endosperm. Okay, endospores, most resistant form of life known, and endosperm, the food source. Anybody happen to know if that's diploid or triploid? It's triploid, which means it has not just 2 sets of chromosomes, it has 3 sets of chromosomes, which is kind of an unusual situation. But remember that, you've got a question. Okay. Any other questions? I think it's really important that unless you can't be here, review sessions are really important because I try to give you pretty pointed review. I did not prepare a sheet for you because this is what you're getting instead. And so those of you who are here, it should be very useful to you. Some of you could not be here, and I was told why you can't be here, so I'm not knocking some of the people who are here. But review days are really important. So I'm glad we had a whole day to do this. So, yes?
We didn't really talk much about like as far as like
Fungi.
questions.
Okay, and remember, always keep in mind that there's a lot of stuff that we've studied, lots and lots and lots of stuff, and to bring it to 60 questions, we could have easily done much more than that. But for fungi, I would say they're made of hyphae, and the network of hyphae is a mycelium. And whatever you don't use on questions, you can put in your statements of fact. Remember? And make sure those are statements of fact. Don't say, I learned about fungi. You're not going to get credit for it. You have to tell me something specific. Okay, also I would know particular emphasis on basidiomycetes and ascomycetes, the differences between those, what their common names are. Their ascomycetes are called blank fungi because of the shape of their reproductive structure.
Pseudofungi?
What?
Sac fungi.
Sac or cup, whichever, sac or cup fungi are ascomycetes. Which one are the yeasts in? They're in the ascomycetes. The basidiomycetes include the mushrooms, the,
Blood fungi.
the shell fungi, and their reproductive structures resemble little, what?
A club.
Little clubs. And so they're called club, C-L-U-B, club fungi, or the basidiomycetes. We also already have talked about how they get their nutrition, right? Digestive enzymes and so forth. I didn't ask you a lot, so if you know a lot more about fungi, you can always use those as statements of information. They're heterotrophic, absolutely. And they're eukaryotic heterotrophs. Yes. Everything above that first chapter is a eukaryote. And after we finish this test on Wednesday, we start, no, we don't. We go to viruses first, which are out of order and they're not really living, but we study them a little bit. And then we go to the animals.
Did you just say viruses were not living?
I consider them not to be living, but we do study how they live because they cause so much harm. They don't have cells. They can't do anything on their own. They're obligate intracellular parasites. So we don't really say they're truly living, but they sure do affect living things.
Yeah, because I had always been taught that they are living.
Well, yeah, there's a debate among people.
It's not
They can't do anything. They can't reproduce on their own. They can't.
like they can't get from one place to another.
They use the air. That's okay. If you gave me test questions, you may pick them up on the way out so that you can study from them. Thank you very much. Those were good and very helpful. I appreciate it.